Hello, I'm Mary Ito, and welcome to the Cram Podcast. So this morning, I woke up, I slathered my face with a non-toxic, nature-infused organic moisturizer. Then I had a cup of fair trade, ethically sourced coffee with a slice of 1,000-grain prehistoric bread. Okay, of course, I'm kidding. I don't know. It was 12-grain or 40-grain bread. Who knows? I didn't count how many grains were in it. And then I had some pretty awful-looking juice that looks like something my cat threw up, but it does claim to be 100% natural, locally sourced, and it will help save the planet. Okay, so how can I go wrong, right? Starting my day in such a morally righteous way. You'd think I'd feel good about it, but there's always this sort of creeping, guilty feeling that I can do better. Slogans like these are everywhere. We are slammed every day to make moral and ethical choices in the products we consume. It's all part of ethical marketing. But what exactly is that? How did it become so popular? And are we really making informed choices? It's something that Aboelenien thinks a lot about, and she studies it as well. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Marketing at HEC Montreal, which is the School of Business at the University of Montreal. And she joins us. Hello, Aya.
Hello, Mary. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have you on. This is such an interesting topic. And I talked about feeling sort of guilty, right. And I wonder what you think about that. Like whether you think it's common to feel guilty today just because of the marketing that we're getting, and then determining the choices of the products we buy.
Well, it depends. There's some people who feel guilty because they feel like you said, right? They could be doing better, right? They could be using this better product that is more sustainable or safer for the environment, right? But there are other people who feel so overwhelmed by these messages, so they actually decide not to indulge in this area because it is so hard to understand the messages, say what is like greenwashing and what's really ethical and sustainable and more like the companies are claiming, right? So there are mixed feelings. There are people who feel guilty. There are people who try to evade it. There are people who feel like, oh, this is just a marketing scam and I don't trust it entirely, right?
Do you know what? Now that you say that, I bet I feel all of that. Because I think depending on the product it might be so complicated. And I think, oh my goodness, I don't have time to do all that research. I think I just do the fallback position and I buy what I've always bought. And let me just say this too, to the point where sometimes I think, depending on who's coming over, like who I'm entertaining, if I think, oh, those people are right on top of things, I think, oh no, oh my gosh, they're going to see everything I have. They're going to judge me. They're going to think I'm a terrible human being.
But you're not alone, Mary. Don't worry. There's a lot of consumers out there who are actually overwhelmed by these messages. And this is why there are corporations who try to certify products so that when you see the label, then it gives consumers more of a reassurance that the we're buying is actually ethical. So it kind of makes them skip all these thought processes. So you do not have to think about it and you're not overwhelmed by the messages. So once you see this logo on the product, you're 100% sure that it's not tested on animals if you're talking about cosmetic products, for example, or it's ethically sourced if you're talking about other products, just so that they're trying to bypass this idea of being overwhelmed and bombarded by information and putting all this mental thinking and mental overload on the consumers. Sometimes it works and at other times still doesn't work. And like you said, it depends on who you're interacting with, that eventually if you want a social signal, for example, that you're because you're entertaining all these people that are into this type of products, so you're consuming like them, right? But on your daily basis, they're not really going to think that through.
And looking back, I mean, when did this really start to take hold and why? Why did this happen and how did it happen?
I think it depends on that because we're talking about ethical marketing in general, right? So it infiltrated industries differently. So I think what gave it the bigger push was social media and the fact that everybody became connected and all the bad things that corporations were doing, they couldn't concede it anymore. It became scandalous over social media platforms and consumers were able to share their opinions, share their frustration. So it rather than having one unsatisfied person, right? They would create echo chambers and they were rally support against you, right? So they kind of force companies to rethink what they're doing. In certain industries, it became far more like pressuring than others. Like think of the fashion industry, just because of how much polluting it was and like all these concerns that were raised across it. It became very easy to put companies under the spotlight. And I think currently what's happening with social media is that you have all these ethical companies that started to appear that became sustainable, that they were trying to like put the environment, put the ecosystem, put everything in their like at the top of their head and like formulate their entire business model on it, that they kind of gave the consumers a way out, right? So like if you really care about the environment, you're kind of not stuck with these big corporations that are doing nothing. It was rather that you have this alternative. You can go around and use that alternative, which is available. Yes, it might be higher price, but it kind of fits your values. So social media, the rise of like all these small corporations that are walking the talk and like doing everything correctly, they kind of force the market, all of them, industries in general, to kind of rethink what they have been like doing for years and years to see what is no longer working, right?
You know, and I'm also wondering too whether it was like, everything seems to coincide, right? We have huge problems. Well, the biggest being climate change, arguably, right? And not just climate change, but climate change spurred on by youth.
Yeah.
Youth were very interested. They're activists, right? And then through social media, you can see, right, how then this movement even becomes stronger and stronger.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering about that too. Like when it comes to demographically, which groups are really demanding this? You know, who is it? Who
like
are
you
the
said,
people?
it's the younger generation that's spearheading most of the changes. Like they're the ones who are more consciously aware of the problems, right? They're the ones who are actively seeking change. It's their future eventually, right? Like if you think of like our grandparents and great grandparents, they don't have this in mind, right? And like the messages that they were seeing in the advertisements back then is very different than what the values of today's society is all about, right? So you kind of expect, and that's the truth, and that's what research everywhere is saying, is that the younger generations that are actually acting and demanding change, and they are the future of these corporations. So if they want to stay on top of their game, right, so they have to kind of adhere to the new values where like everybody's shifting towards. And I want to say something else about ethical marketing when you're saying about that. And I told you, like, it's all about being a good citizen, right? But there's also newer trends towards becoming like activists, right? So it's not just about producing ethically and like being, like thinking of your communities, right? It's being also a good citizen in the respect of there's social and political issues that are surrounding us everywhere. And companies are taking like a stand against these like bad values or like older values or like stereotypes or like, right? And they're trying to say, okay, we do not adhere to these values anymore. And the reason why I got this is when you're talking about younger people, like think of Barbie's new movie, for instance, right? So like the way they depict the new Barbie and like her values is very different than the Barbie we grew up with like ages ago, right? And like if you go into the store now, the diversity of the Barbie dolls that you're going to see is quite drastic than what you've seen growing up either, right? I would have never imagined seeing a Barbie that looks like me or like has a regular body type on the shelf, right? So it's been there for ages, but it's the younger generation with all these values about body positivity and embracing who you are, embracing your identity. That's kind of making these companies rethink what they're doing. And for me, that's ethical marketing too, because it's about inclusivity.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So that opens up a whole box of stuff there but I definitely want to get into Barbie because that could be a whole podcast in itself, I think. But just before we get into that, I wonder if you could give me, you know, some examples from the past of like companies that have been called out for unethical marketing, right? Because that also, I guess, causes change and it pushes the movement forward as well. Can you give us maybe some well-known examples?
So like most of the fast fashion brands, like think of Zara, H&M, the way that they were sourcing their products in the past and like all the way that they were sourcing and treating their laborers in third world countries was putting them under the spotlight. That's one example. Think of Victoria's Secret and the way they were like picture, like picking their models and like the photos that we've seen and the type of like, this is the beauty standard that she should match, right? Which is very, very unrealistic to how most women would look like, right? They were called out as well. So like, these are like very prominent examples and they're like in two different, like, I'm not gonna say they're the same industry. They're in the fashion industry at the end of the day, but they were called out for different reasons, right? So one of them is for like violating the social acceptability of what a woman should look like and trying to force us into a very narrow definition of beauty standards and how we should behave and what we should like aspire to be like, right? And the other is about fast fashion, where what you're wearing today is not going to be fashionable tomorrow, so you discard it. But like thinking of how it was produced, thinking of how it's going to get discarded eventually, it's polluting the environment. So it's very unsustainable from that perspective, but it is also violating the communities that helped us create that garment in the first place. And both were under attack previously for unethical practices.
Yeah. And I think I heard recently that a couple of the big chains are getting into used clothing.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
right.
Yes, they have the rewear.
Yeah,
where they're establishing on their platform, so you kind of resell your older garments. And what's nice about it, I think, is that you're not only selling your older garments that you bought from that store. I think you can just give them all your used garments, no matter what the brand is, and they will give you store credits to buy from them, right? And like H&M also are doing another initiative where they introduce the conscious line, right? And that line is supposed to be more sustainable than their regular everyday like garments that they sell in general, right? So they're trying to follow sustainability with these two introductions. But whether it's working or not for them, that's another question, because they are also facing like skepticism and like people are saying, but that's not actually true. What you're doing is just you're trying to pacify consumers, but the lines are not actually that conscious after all. They're still polluting the environment. So they're trying. Whether it's working or not, that's up for debate.
Yeah, and when you think a lot about the food industry, there has been definitely criticism there, right? With a number of companies.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of the bigger. I want to say fashion was one of the bigger industries, at least from my perspective, that faced like backlash. Food would come close second, but most of the problems with the food industry has to be with the chemicals and like how unhealthy the products that we're like, right? So it's them being unethical in the way that they're harming their own consumers, right? So like how addictive the foods are, so that they were consuming more, they're leading us towards obesity, they're unhealthy for children, but they're marketed for children, some of the snacks and all these things. So this is the major criticism, is that they're actually harmful for the consumers that they're selling to, right? When the fashion industry is harmful to, it's making it more interesting because they're harmful to everybody else but the consumers who are wearing their clothes, right? So they're harmful to the environment, they're harmful to their suppliers, to the laborers, but like the consumer who are wearing them are kind of a bit detached from the problem. For the food industry, you're consuming what is wrong for you, right? So it becomes easier on the sustainable companies or like the more naturally or organic produced foods to kind of convince consumers to go follow them, because eventually it's what goes into your own body. So it becomes an easier argument to bring consumers on board. But fashion, because it's like a bit distinct, then it becomes harder.
Interesting. Yeah. And, when I think about these, you talk about the products and the companies and how they do their business. Like if you were to create a list, of what is required today to be considered an ethical company, what would be the list? You know what I mean? What would be the definition?
Oh my God, that's a lot, right? So like, it depends on who you're asking, right? Because some consumers, they do not have like high standards, right? But if you're talking about like highly involved consumers or really into sustainability, it would be about being a good citizen in terms of how you source,
right,
produce, allow consumers to consume, market your own product. So they're kind of not using wrong messages and so on and so forth. And the way that you discard these products, right? So you're kind of safe for the people who have to source. You're safe for the people who are consuming you. You're safe for the environment and the ecosystem in which you exist. And at the same time, you're taking an active stand to help the community, like proactively help the communities in which you engage in. Like, I want to take you to a different example, right? That has nothing to do with what we're discussing so far. So like, if we look into Ben and Jerry's, it's an ice cream brand, right? But they've been very well known for being activists because they're standing for different social causes, like talking about immigrants, talking about women's rights. So they are like talking about Black Lives Matter, when like producing ice creams with the flavors with these causes that they're supporting, right? So that's also for me being a good citizen, because it's not just we're not like, these brands are not living in vacuum, right? And they're not like isolated from the consumer. And the relationship between them and the consumer is not just, okay, you get something, you eat it, you leave it, and that's it. But it's more of, they can educate consumers and they can help consumers become better themselves too. So this is for me like the checklist. I'm not saying that everybody agrees that this is very expensive, right? So like, if you really, really want to become an ethical company, this is what you should be doing. But it all depends on the stakeholders you're trying to satisfy.
So you mentioned Ben and Jerry's. I mean, I hadn't realized Ben and Jerry's was doing all that. Who else? Like, who else? If you had to again create another list of these are companies that, and I don't mean just you personally, but maybe generally the public considers them to be ethical companies. They have a pretty good reputation as far as the public goes. Who would be on that list? Do you think a couple of companies you can think of?
I'm gonna go with fashion because that's one of the easier ones to think of, like so Patagonia, for example, right? So,
oh my goodness, that's mentioned everywhere. Everywhere I look, everywhere I read, it's always Patagonia comes up.
So when you're thinking of being sustainable and like making sure that you're protecting the environment, right? So like they get every single item on the checklist. Like if there was ever a checklist, then right? So Patagonia, another company is Century. At least in my perspective, like they're pretty famous, they're pretty large. Both of them, like they were established from the get-go. All their business model is about how to become sustainable and how to be better, right? So what I like about these two companies is that it's not just, okay, we're perfect, right? That's not what they say about themselves. What they're saying is we're good. There is more that could be done, right? So for me, they're always aspiring to be better sustainably. They're always aspiring to be more environmentally friendly. So they're trying to reduce skepticism from the consumers. They have never been unethical or like unsustainable or whatever, because this is their model from inception. But at the same time, they're trying to give a realistic image that achieving that level of sustainability is not easy. And it's something that you have to consciously think about as a business and consciously and continuously do something actively about it to be better.
Well, okay. So you say it's not easy. I'm sure it's not easy because that's, is your main purpose in it to be that? It's not, right? You're a clothing company. That is actually your main purpose, right? To sell clothes, but you also have this other, mission to be a good corporate citizen in that case. And I can see sometimes those two might be at odds with each other, right? Like, I don't know. I honestly don't know how well Patagonia is doing, but I think it would be interesting. Maybe, like if they're doing well, then it is possible to be this good corporate citizen and your bottom line is doing well. I don't know.
I think for them, they consider themselves doing well, right? They're ups and downs, and like with COVID, things got better, but then afterwards, like sustainability said, it's like a plump because people became further away from the environment, right? Like at COVID, like during the pandemic, everybody was like having all these thoughts and like reflecting on their consumption, right? And it kind of took a boost at that time. Now that we're moving further away and going back to our daily lives, unfortunately, a lot of people went back to their old habits, right? So I would say that when you decide to be that sustainable, like you have to have realistic projections and forecasts as to, you're not competing with like a fast food fast fashion brand, right? So it's not the same sales. You're doing good because for you and your own forecast and your target market, the environmentally conscious consumer, you're reaching them. They like you. There's a good loyalty. There's good feedback. You are their favorite brand, right? So that works for you. And this is what the people that you're aspiring to target eventually, right? But like I cannot say in consensus whether like in general, right? If you look at their market share versus other brands, they're not like the top five, right? But I don't think this is also where they aspire to be, or realistically, they cannot do it. At least from what I think, unless everybody in the market becomes to think of sustainability as like the first thing on their shopping list, right? So when you're trying, it's not price anymore. It's be right sustainable.
So when I think about maybe other areas as well of, companies or products that have existed that were okay at one time, but now, today in the 21st century, like it's not okay. So can you think of some companies or whatever, like products that, people look back and now they say, wait a second, this isn't good anymore?
Right. So let's take that. We said that all this ethical marketing kind of took like the biggest push, right, with the younger generation, right? So it's all about like brands targeting kids. So think of Dr. Seuss, for example. Like we grew up reading Dr. Seuss books. Like, for us, for some reason, they were unproblematic, right? Maybe because we didn't know any better, right? Right now, like the consumers are having issues with some of the values that are being enlisted in these books, and they're saying, "Oh, we don't want to subject our kids to these values because they do not match what we're trying to raise them to be," right? And there was like this hashtag on social media which was cancel Dr. Seuss and asking people to stop reading the books, and if you have the books, to just get rid of them. And as a result, Dr. Seuss decided, like the corporation decided to eliminate 6 of their books, where they said, okay, we know that these books are problematic, and this is why we decided to like remove them from our collection. And if we like follow that train of thought, another example is Disney. And like we all grew watching like Disney princesses, right? And if you think about it, they're a bunch of 16 years old. All they care about in the movie is just finding their like prince, right? Prince Charming. And they're always in a problem and the prince is the one saving them, right? And there was a huge issues against these movies, and like people saying, okay, these princesses are not they're not reflective of how we want women to behave, or how we want our girls to think about themselves, or like what their future entails. And so Disney decided to do about these movies, rather than like remove them or whatever, to just add like a disclaimer at the beginning of the movies and say, oh, we know these movies do not adhere to the values of today's society. And okay, watch at your own, with your own free will, viewer discretion advice whatsoever. And this also caused backlash, because for some of the like activists against these movies, they're saying this is not enough, right? Like what this is like just a screen at the beginning of the movie, and that's it.
So that's interesting. Like, cause I knew about the whole diversity thing. Yeah. I knew about that Disney was being criticized and they wanted new kinds of heroes, right, in their movies. I didn't know about the fact that they had put a disclaimer at the beginning. So it's not as if they actually like remove the movies. I don't know how you feel about that. Because this is definitely an ongoing issue, not just with movies, but with anything, right? With literature, with other art forms like paintings, etc., with statues, monuments. And I do hear 2 arguments, right? One is that you need to completely abolish whatever it is because it is offensive. And then the other argument I hear is, no, not necessarily, because that is abolishing history. And so we still need to know that this is a product of its time, but maybe we need to not maybe a disclaimer, but we need to have something added on to give it context that things have changed, but this was the thinking of that time. How do you feel about that?
Well, both of them have like merit in the argument, right? Like if you remove them, you're kind of trying to say to your consumers, we acknowledge that we were mistaken and we decided to take this drastic step and do what Dr. Seuss did and just like remove 6 of your books, right? Or, and in that case, you're kind of saying to your consumers, we know we have been wrong, right? So Victoria's Secret, they canceled their Angels show, so that because what they're saying is, oh, after all these backlashes against us and like the beauty standards we put forward, we know that we were mistaken, and this is how we're changing, so we're removing the Angels show entirely, right? So like there are brands that kind of took that drastic step of like eliminating or removing something that has been with them since inception. And there are other brands where, like Disney said, okay, we acknowledge we were mistaken at a point in time. And like you said, there is merit in having it and saying, okay, this is part of the history. And if you look at it and the time it was produced, this was what was perpetuated in the society at that time. So just take it with that perspective in mind. But then when you think about it, like most of the people who watch Disney are kids, right? So they do not really have the capacity in their brain to kind of watch these movies and say, oh, okay, this was the princess in the past. This is what it should be like in today's society, right? So they do not have this ability to make this distinction. Us as adults were able to do that, and we're able to like watch these movies and understand that there's history behind it. And yes, there was something wrong in the society at that time. And yes, we're rewatching the movie and we're critically analyzing it. But when you think about the target market of such movie, they're incapable of doing that thing. So is it good? Is it bad?
Yeah, that's a tough one because here, both you and I, right? We probably grew up on some of this stuff. I mean, I'm older than you, but I did. And I reflect now back and I see, oh, you know what? That wasn't so cool. That wasn't so good. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like part of me is, yes, I understand that. And you don't want to take advantage of children. On the other hand, I hate to think that we're going to shelter a society so much that then you're losing that kind of not just freedom of expression for everyone, but my freedom as well to decide how I want to see it, to decide what in the end what I think about it. It's a difficult issue.
It is. It's a very difficult situation. And I don't think there is a consensus as this is the right way of doing business or like this is the right way of remedying the situation. Because like I said, like corporations are taking it differently. Like you said, consumers are taking it differently. So it's not like everybody agrees, oh, we should like eliminate all these Disney movies, right? There are consumers who are saying, okay, no, it's fine. Just keep them. Like, it's not like I'm going to ask my daughter to get married when she's 16, for example, right? And it doesn't make sense that we eliminate these movies. Right? And there are people who actually enjoy watching them because there is something nice to watch about it as well, right? So it's a very tough decision as to say what is the best way forward with companies that have done something unethically in the past, no matter what the unethical part is, especially if it is divisive, right? So should we go right or should we go left, right?
Yeah. And, I think about, because I've heard a parenting columnist say this. I mean, in a good scenario, you maybe would sit down with your child and you'd watch that movie and then you'd have a discussion about, well, what did you think about that? And and you raise some questions and then that makes the kid think about it. Right. And so then when they watch the next kind of Disney movie or whatever, they think, oh, wait a minute. I don't know about that. But then of course, every parent doesn't have the time to sit down and do that probably.
Exactly. Or rewatch the movie, right? You kind of remember some of it, but like rewatching it as well. But no, it's a question worth asking yourself in general, right?
Yeah. Okay. So this is a perfect time now to bring up Barbie again, because I'm just fascinated, not just with the movie and then what it did, because it was such a blockbuster, right? It was huge, huge, huge. And I think it ended up changing the minds of, a number of people who saw it, about Barbie and its sort of, trajectory. But then again, you talk about Mattel and how they've changed their line. So can you talk about, I don't know if they're a case study in business school and marketing, but tell me about it. Tell me about Mattel and what they did.
So there isn't a case study, but I actually write about it in one of the papers. It's not on Barbie only, but it's about Mattel and other companies as well, including Disney. So they okay, so let's take it in the past, right? So their lines on the American Doll, they were like all talking about the American history, right? And they were all white females, and they had like one doll with like very minor history attached to it, right? If you look into Barbie, they were like all slim, white, able-bodied Barbie. Okay, right?
Not just slim. They didn't have realistic at all measurements. Like it was,
Exactly.
Not of this planet. Yeah, not of this planet.
I totally agree. They weren't even realistic, right? So what they did over the years is that they started to have a better reflection of women in society, right? So they introduced different bodies and different skin colors, different abilities. they introduce Barbies with different histories in general. So like, not just white. They have like one with like hijab for like Muslim girls, and like they started to infuse their line with better representation of women, right? And it's not just Barbie in her bikini waiting for Ken, whatever, right? There's Barbie the scientist, there's Barbie the mathematician, there's Barbie the engineer. So it's different professions as well for women, right? So they started to expand their lines to kind of give a more realistic representation, because I'm not going to say inspiration, because women had been engineers and scientists before Barbie had the lines, right? So it was like a better representation of what women looked like in their like American dolls. They started to like incorporate other dolls that are non-white, right? Because the American history is not just white women, right? So they started to incorporate better dolls, which I think gives more like inclusivity in the market. And it is something that you might applaud them for it. I would say that they've been late doing it. Like they could have done it even sooner, because like there were talks about all these things in the past, and it's been quite some time, but it took them time to actually react to the market and proactively do things about their lines to kind of have a more inclusive like product line, and for you to have a doll that looks like you on the shelf in the supermarket, right?
So generally right now, are they well regarded, would you say, by the public, and kids are buying, moms and dads or whomever are buying their dolls, and I mean, it seems to me that the movie had a lot to do with it too.
Yes. Like, I think the movie kind of made this, they have changed, right? They kind of made this mindset in their, it became more crystallized, I think. And like they trusted them more than they are really changing. And the Barbie is just not this oblivious female living in an oblivious world, but like that's not the reality of it anymore. So I would say that the movie really had a positive impact on the firm, and it might have made consumers realize what Mattel has been doing for quite some time.
It's interesting because that movie, and I may offend a lot of people here because I know they're huge fans of that movie, and I will say, I mean, it was fun. I didn't think it was fun, but. I mean, I know the main Barbie, the Barbie that's always existed, has been white.
Yeah.
And she's looked a certain way. And so I guess they felt they had to go with that as the main character. But, as far as the main actor goes who played Barbie, Margot, and I can't remember her last name, but not too many women look like her. What I mean? I kind of felt, well, okay, she did a great job. She's a good actress in that, but they could have gone further with it. And I still felt it was somehow, I don't know, it still fell within this kind of restrictive, middle class sensibilities, and even with Barbie the line, I still like I feel the stories that you talk about in that, they're still pretty middle class, wouldn't you say? Like it's still kind of within a certain, structure of what we consider to be success and happiness and, life goals and all that. I don't know. Am I being too hard? Maybe I'm being too hard on Barbie.
No, but this is all like good criticism for the firm, right? So like the movie, a lot of people liked it, but
I know.
It does not necessarily mean that they could not have done better, right? So like they tried with the secondary actresses to have like all this diversity and all this all the differences, right? Like they feel like all of them, right? And they tried, right? But whether they should have done it as the primary actress, like whether it should have been like a better representation, whether they could have done a better job. Maybe they're planning another movie with a better job.
Yeah, that'll be the sequel.
Right?
Yeah.
The coming one where we can see.
But again, I mean, from a marketing standpoint, that probably would be considered a success, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
For the movie and the company, how it's regarded in general. Like they're like, if you go into like parenting forums and they're like, oh, I would have never thought that like how this movie would have positively impacted my view of the brand. Like it has healed my inner self. And they're like, all these women are saying that like it kind of healed something in them, because growing up they had to buy the Barbie that had zero resemblance to how they look like, right? But now on the shelf and now with the movie, they're trying to say, oh, okay, so we exist, we're acknowledged, we're seen, right? So it did have a positive impact from the marketing perspective in terms of fixing the relationship the company has with their consumers and with their target market, of course.
I get, little steps, I guess, right?
Yes.
You have to take little steps, steps.
Yes.
Yeah. But, I this is just an area, I mean, it's fraught with all kinds of inherent challenges. I mean, we talked about one big one, which is, of course, a company is out there. They've got a product to flog. They're out there to make money, but now they got to deal with all these ethical concerns, right? So there's a lot of tension between that. And then I think about, with like Barbie, marketing to children, that's got to be super tricky.
Yes, that's another dilemma in marketing in general, right? And it's been a dilemma ever since like the marketing discipline appeared, right? At least now there are like a lot of regulations of how and what to market to children. Like they're controlled over the process, but it's always an issue, right? Especially with social media, because it's not necessarily the company that is like doing something. It might be like the brand ambassadors or like the influencers that they're like sponsoring or like partnering with, right? So the message can infiltrate the children. So how much you're protecting them, that's a whole issue. And
I don't know if you remember. Yeah, I don't know if you remember this, but I remember at one time there used to be these candy cigarettes, but you could, I think, sort of like puff on them, and then there'd be this sort of smoke. Like not real smoke. Yeah, but it was sort of like part of the candy that would be a kind of a white puffy smoke that would come out as if you're smoking. That did not go over well. Not at all. Yeah.
I have to research the product after our podcast, because that's one interesting case about how a product fails miserably from its inception.
Yeah. Well, when you think of it, I mean, cigarettes, that like totally, you can't even advertise. Most forms of advertising are banned for cigarettes. So you can't even do that. So certainly not for children. And the other thing I wanted to ask you about, because you've written about this as well, is the rise of a phenomenon called ethical influencers. Like, this is a new thing, right? With social media.
Right. So ethical influencers really are like the regular day-to-day people who kind of took like sustainability and like ethical concerns like veganism even to their hearts, right? And they became that, so they became vegans, or they became environmentally conscious, or they became zero waste. They're like they embody the values that they're trying to like enlist in other people, and they're using the platforms to kind of convince others that this is the right way to go. Some of them became like mega celebrities, right? And others, they're striving and they're trying, they have reach, and they definitely have a positive influence on the cause, right? Because they're trying within their networks to convince people to consume less and think before they buy, and not buy whenever like there is a big sale, and rethink what they're actually buying and whether they actually need it, and the implications of what they're buying on like animals and the planet, and right? So they do have a very positive impact on like others and influencing the behaviors of others. And what I did like about studying ethical influencers is that because they're regular human beings, right, it becomes more trustworthy. They're kind of more credible, because this is just a human being who read something, who became convinced of this value. He decided to alter his life to live with this value, and he's just like sharing his life story, right? Some of them are even sharing their struggles. So it becomes far more realistic. So like if I want to live zero waste, or if I want to practice slow living, or if I want to become a vegan, I don't have like kind of an idealized self or like everything is perfect and like do X, Y, Z. I have like these influencers who I can follow who are like struggling, who are like trying to convince me every day as to why that matters, who know that the journey is hard, but like they're accompanying me in it, right? So like, I wouldn't say that they're new, because I would say that people who've lived sustainably forever try to reach out to the people they know to try and convince them. It's just that social media kind of gave them a platform to like speak louder, right? And reach more people.
I wonder, because I don't really, I guess, follow them, but would you say that the ones who are doing really well, like, they've got millions maybe of followers, are they getting paid to do this? Do they represent any companies? Because then I'm kind of, you know what I mean? I wonder, okay, so yeah, what's that about too?
That's pretty interesting because some of them actually write clearly that they do not accept any form of paid content. Like they don't. So they can advocate for brands, but they're advocating for these brands is based on their own like experiences. So like they have actually used the brand. They do find that the brand is sustainable. They do find that the brand is like easily discarded off. It's not environmentally harmful, whatever. And this is why they're using their platforms to use it. So it was quite interesting actually what you mentioned because it kind of like there are other research that kind of say that when the influencers in general kind of become paid by these corporations, that the credibility kind of declines, right? And I think this is why, like a lot of the ethical influencers that we follow on social media kind of make it very clear that their content is not sponsored and that they do not accept any form of sponsored content. And if they do have a sponsored content, then they clearly market as sponsored, right? And if you do look actually through their like the sponsored part of some of these influencers, the brands that they are partnering with and like advocating for are 100% sustainable. So there are also brands from inception that have this business model of like being environmentally conscious or like from the start not harming animals. So as a consumer, when you look into the history of these brands, you kind of, okay, so the ethical influencer doesn't just try to make money. What he's saying is actually correct. Like these brands actually have these values. So they are some who evade it entirely because they want to keep their credibility. But overall, those who actually partner still say that they're paid because I think this makes them even more credible, right? When you get paid for something, you kind of say that this is the sponsored content. So you kind of believe them too.
Yeah. You're putting your conflict of interest right out there. Yeah. You know, I don't know if this is an area that you've studied much, but I do wonder about the impact of AI.
Well, I think the AI has a lot of positives, and in terms of ethics too, right? So, like, they can help companies, better see like suppliers, like pick suppliers that match their values, right? And make sure that they're sustainable across the line. They communicate that towards their consumers as well, right? Because they're giving them the tools to check, verify, and actually communicate that to consumers. So there's like a lot of positives to it in terms of like talking about sustainability at large and making sure that you're actually a sustainable firm. But at the same time, AI has like a lot of other issues that like I don't think they're still very well regulated because it's something that is evolving. Like if you think about data privacy, for example, that's like a huge issue in marketing in general because these firms have a lot of information about us, right?
Yeah.
So all your Amazon history is recorded, right? So like, all these recommendations for products, is this ethical? Yes, I am using your own history. So like, it's a way of me targeting you with things that I know that you'd like. But is this consumerism? Am I pushing you to buy more than you actually need? So there is that too, right? So I can't really say now, like definitely AI is the future of everything, right? So like it's going to change how we do, it is already changing how we do marketing and it's going to change how we do marketing. But it's opening a lot of like ethical concerns as to how companies are doing business. There are benefits for it to help the companies become more ethical, but I think it rests on the instincts of the firms to actually adhere to being good citizens in general. So if they decide to be good citizens, then I think the use of AI would be perfect. And
yeah, you know what? So for me, my question would be just because of AI and because AI is able to mimic and replicate and emulate so many things realistically that we have a hard time knowing what is authentic, right? What is genuine and what is not.
Yeah.
And I wonder then when it comes to marketing and the future, you know, will we turn more away from what companies are saying because we maybe don't trust them as much, and we're looking for kind of something like ethical influencers, you know, people like us and people who we trust, right? Because who do we put our trust in as far as recommending and saying, you know, this is good, this is bad because of AI? I'm not quite sure, but I wonder about that.
I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, Mary, but have you heard of virtual influencers? So like these are virtual influencers.
No.
So these are AI-powered influencers who look like actual human beings. So if you open their like pages on social media, some of them are like advocating for ethical causes, by the way. So if you open their platforms, they are human-like, but they're not human. So
and wait a second. So are you saying, is it stated up front that it is an AI?
The majority of them, yes. They say like we are robot girl, we are AI generated, we're whatever. So like it will be stated in their bios, right? Because I think it's so far it's required by the platform that they have to clearly state it. So Instagram, it's written in their bio.
Okay.
Right? But like if you think about credibility, that's eventually another human being just sitting behind the screen, writing whatever, and they're saying how they're living sustainably. They're not even living, right? So
that's so interesting. Right? Okay, you know what? Okay, the way I think I could maybe buy that is if this AI entity, right? Because they actually have access to way more information than I do, if they're able to critically assess, right? Let's say these products, whatever, given the fact that they have all this, then maybe I'm interested, right? I'm just oh my God. The world. Oh, it's changing so fast.
Yeah, exactly. And this is, like when you're saying ethical influencers, I was like, okay, there are these two, but like, what about their credibility? What about us trusting them?
So yeah, no, absolutely. Your job is fascinating, isn't it?
Yes.
Studying all this.
I enjoyed very much.
Well, we enjoyed having you on.
Thank you, Mary, so much for your time. It was lovely chatting with you.
Yeah, it was great chatting with you, Aya. Thank you.
Best of luck in your coming podcast.
That's Aya Aboelenien. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Marketing at HEC Montreal, which is the School of Business at the University of Montreal. Now, if you'd like to know more about Aya and her work, you can check out our show notes. That's it for today's Cram podcast. Hope you liked it. And we really would love to have your review if you have the time. Also, if you follow us on social, our handle is @CramIdeas. You can stay up to date on our podcasts and the topics that we're covering. Check in with us for our next podcast when I interview the former head of Apple's digital health strategies. It should be a fascinating conversation. Dr. Mike Evans on the low-tech way of living longer. Thanks so much for listening. See you back here next time.